Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us. And I just want to acknowledge and say thank you to everyone for all of your prayers and your well wishes for the recovery of my shoulder for last week. And I do apologize. I don't know exactly what happened, what I did. It might have been the way I slept one night or something, but just had tremendous spasm and pain in the shoulder and couldn't find a spot to be comfortable in. So I was up for several nights. I was just up sitting in the chair trying to find a place that didn't hurt. So last Sunday was like that, and I was in no shape to even set up the equipment, much less try to hold a thought, a conversation. So I appreciate your concern. But all is well, and we're here. We're going to pick up where we left off with the obstacles we encounter along the path. Now this topic, I don't know that we'll finish it today. We may not. Don't know where it's going to go yet. But I think it's very important. And I'll try to set some context, and we'll try to get into it a little bit. So Dr. Holmes tells us that we are spiritual adventurers in the unexplored territory of mind. Now I want you to think about that. What kind of an image comes to you when you think of yourself as an adventurer? What kind of an adventurer are you? You know, the one that comes into my mind is like the pictures of the astronauts in their spacesuits and out on their spacewalks, and you can't see their face because the visor is so dark, but you can see the reflections bouncing off of it and those things. But for other people, it may be different. You may envision yourself like Pippi Longstocking standing on the front of the ship as it sails along. Perhaps on a boat crossing the oceans, perhaps in a covered wagon crossing the prairies, perhaps climbing a tall peak. I don't know. There's a sense of adventure there somewhere. And what kind of rouses your sense of adventure? What is it that comes to your mind when you think about going on a great adventure? What is it like to be going on a great adventure? And the reason I bring that up is I would hope that is the attitude that we can take into each and every day, because each and every day is an adventure. Right? An adventure of our soul, an adventure of discovering more of what God is, an adventure of finding more of the love and more of the peace and more of the joy in the midst of the confusion, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the seeming craziness of everything else that's going on in the world, in the news. Can we find the peace? Can we find the good that is there? We have a couple of examples from the Old Testament that come to mind, and this may not be what the original meaning of these parables was, but this is what they mean to me today. We have Daniel in the lion's den, and here he is with this creature that people are terrified of, and tearing people limb from limb, and yet he's fine in there. He's okay. We have Shadrach in the furnace, and he's doing fine in there. He's okay. So in the midst of the confusion, in the midst of everything else that seems to be going on, we have to recognize that divine love is right there. It has never left. It is right there. It may be covered up. The poet says, the life within us is the spark that we might desecrate, but we can never destroy. It's always there. It's always with us. And this spark of life that is within us is calling us to itself. Remember we talked a couple of weeks ago about the moth to the flame. The moth to the flame. The flame is calling us to itself. Come to me. Come to me. Be with me. Recognize your oneness with me. See? And this stirs up within us this desire that eventually overtakes us. As I said in the opening treatment, we get to choose when we get serious about this. We get to choose the kind of the tools that we're going to use along the way, the teachers, the talks, the books, the practice, all of the different things that we're going to do. We have to find the ones that work for us. But the call is the same. See, the call is generally a call to awaken, And as Goldsmith tells us, and I mention it over and over again, in the book of Genesis, we see that God put Adam into a deep sleep, but nowhere does it tell us that God woke Adam up. So we're all living in the Adam dream. And it is our job, our responsibility. It is up to us, because we're the only ones that can do it. It is up to us to accept the call to awaken. So I kind of liken it to the clock radio goes off in the morning, and you're in your sleep, and it goes off. And at first, it's not too unpleasant. There's a great song playing, and you kind of get into the groove of the music, and you just, and you kind of forget that you're supposed to be awakening. You kind of listen in here and say, "Oh, I hope the next song is as good as the last one." And then all of a sudden, what happens is that that second alarm goes off, and the music switches off, and you get some type of an annoying bleep in your ear, blam, 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 and now you've got to do something. So we do the natural, normal thing: reach over and hit the snooze alarm. Just give me 5 more minutes. Just 5 more minutes. I want to go back to sleep. And of course, in 5 more minutes, it goes off again. And then eventually, either you turn the clock radio off and get up, or you turn the clock radio off and go back to sleep, and you're late for work. There's this something within us that is calling us to awaken. It is telling us it is time. It is always there. It is always there. It is usually very gentle with us. It is encouraging us. It is inspiring us. It is calling us lovingly to itself. But every once in a while, if we dally about too far, too long, we get a whack on the side of the head. We get something happens that makes us to question. Now, I want to be very clear about this, right? The divine is not testing us or punishing us or doing things to us to hurt us so that we'll awaken. Now human beings read those meanings into the events of life, but the divine didn't send them to us. What brought them to us was our own unconsciousness, if you will, our own lack of awareness, not paying attention. Many times people will say, "Well, why did that happen? I wasn't thinking about having that particular thing happen." Well, what were you thinking about? Were you thinking about divine love? Were you thinking about divine protection? Were you thinking about divine harmony? Well, no, I wasn't. I was thinking about what I had to do when I got to work, and then all of a sudden, the car in front of me was stopped, and I couldn't get my foot on the brake quick enough. So we are being called to awaken. Now, how we got to sleep is an entirely different subject for a future talk. But let's just start with the premise that we are asleep. We are in a dream. And it is our task to someday, if it hasn't happened already, to someday awaken and begin the journey back home. Now, Joseph Campbell, if you're familiar with the work of Joseph Campbell, you'll recognize this. If you're not, he's an excellent resource. He wrote The Hero's Journey and The Journey with 1,000 Faces would be good places to start. If you have Netflix, there's a series on Netflix or Amazon, I can't remember which it is, something about legends, monsters and legends, or something of that nature. Mythos is on Netflix, and the other one is on Amazon. But if you just go to either one of those and search for Joseph Campbell, they'll come up. So Joseph Campbell was a professor of mythology. He looked at the different mythologies of the world. Now, the mythology, when we're talking about it, mythology is not a fairy tale. It is not a fake story that is made up for entertainment purposes, but rather a mythology is a metaphor that holds the deep values of a society. It has a meaning way beyond the words and the images and the forms of the story. So you might consider, for example, as we understand in the book of Genesis, there's a creation mythology. In the beginning was the chaos, and God spoke, and said, "Let there be." And we could say, well, that's a mythology about creation. And every culture has a creation myth. Where did we come from? Who am I? Where did I come from? How did I get here? Where am I going? Who am I? Why am I here? Big questions of life. So Campbell went, and he wasn't the first one to do it, but he might be kind of one of the most well-known scholars of our time. And he looked at the different mythologies of the world, and he saw similar structures, and he saw similar things, perhaps things that Carl Jung might have called the archetypes, right? Similar ideas arising in different unrelated cultures around the world, cultures separated by time and space that had no possible way of communicating with one another. Yet their mythologies are similar. So there's two things that come to mind about that. One is that there's something deeper within the human psyche that is kind of bubbling up in symbols and in form. Right? Remember, in the last couple months, we're talking about this experience of the divine as being ineffable. Ineffable. It is that which is beyond words, but from which words come, as the Upanishads would say. The ineffableness of God. So words fail us, and when words fail us, then what happens is symbols and imagery start to take over. And this is why poetry and mystical poetry is so profound, because the mystical poets have a way of painting that picture with words. And that picture means something to it. It's if you remember the old commercials for Memorex, this is how long ago it was. They had these things called tape, recording tapes, and you record. And I'll never forget, it was with Ella Fitzgerald, and she would sing, and she was holding like a crystal wine glass or something, and she would hit a high note, and the glass would resonate with the note until it shattered, and then they would play back her voice on tape, and it would it would resonate, and it would shatter. So the symbols kind of touch something within us. There's something within us that starts to resonate. There's something within us that just kind of, oh, that feels right. That means something. So that's the first thing is we have to recognize that when we start to really get on the path, words are going to fail us. Now, that doesn't mean we don't try to talk about it, because we need words, we need forms, we need something, we need some kind of direction, we need some kind of guidance as we're moving along. But we have to recognize that they're only temporary. Okay? So don't fall in love with the words. Don't fall in love with the teachers or the teachings. Don't fall in love with the books. If you've ever seen the newer version of The Razor's Edge with Bill Murray, and I know I've told you I prefer the older version with Tyrone Power. But this is about a man who is on his spiritual quest, right? And now he has had the traumatic experience. He has gone through the First World War, and he's trying to make sense out of a confused world. This is what I'm saying. If we're not actively on the path, sooner or later something happens that makes us say, wait a minute, what's all this about? So he's on the path. And in the Bill Murray movie, he goes to India and he meets with the guru, and the guru tells him there's three major paths to the divine. There's the path of education or knowledge, there's the path of service, and there's the path of love. And Bill Murray has chosen the path of knowledge. And he has this stack of books that he keeps carrying around. It reminds me of me when I first got into science and mind. I just had this stack of books carrying around with him everywhere to read. So he goes off to live in a little hut up on the top of a mountain somewhere and spend time alone and to search. And for whatever reason, when he gets up there, there's no firewood, or he can't get firewood or something. And now he's literally freezing to death, and he has these cherished books. You know. And finally he decides there's nothing else to do but to burn the books to keep warm. And when he starts to burn the books, he gets it. He just gets it, and he starts laughing, and his laughter grows almost to hysterical laughter, you know. The books are only temporary. They're only tools to get us where we're going. But sooner or later, we're going to have to find our way. So what Campbell did was Campbell kind of laid out stages of the hero's journey, and you can go on your favorite search engine, and you can just search for the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. I think there's 10 or 12 steps that most people lay out, and Campbell kind of laid that out for us, you know. And he said, you know, we kind of start with people in their ordinary setting. Now, if you're into script writing or filmmaking or storytelling or things like that, you'll recognize this as well from Aristotle's Poetics. This is the storyline of movies. By the way, while you're on the internet, just search for, I think it's called the seven plots of movies. And the author claims that every movie that's ever been made has one of these 7 plots. But in Aristotle's Poetics, as well as in Campbell's hero's journey, you know, we start out with our hero, the protagonist, and this is you and I in our spiritual journey. This is you. You're your own hero, and you don't know it yet, perhaps. But we find our hero in their ordinary setting, in their ordinary place. You know, every movie starts with that. You get to know just a little bit about the main character, who you know, who's in their life, what are their ambitions, and those kind of things. And then something happens. There's a call to action. Something happens that rips them out of that normal world and sends them on their version of the hero's journey. And I'm kind of grinning because what comes to my mind is the cop movies. You know, when you start off with a police movie, and there's the old cop who says, you know, I've only got 2 more days to retire. You know something's going to happen. Something's going to happen to that guy. Something, you know, that's when the terrorists are going to fly into town or whatever. Something happens to bring them into the drama. In a spiritual journey, it's not necessarily that dramatic. Sometimes the spiritual journey is when somebody wants to be useful and wants to go on their journey so that they can be more helpful. Sometimes they think there's a problem that needs to be solved. If you remember the mythology of Buddhism, I mean, the Buddha was raised as the prince whose whole view of the world was an illusion. Everything he saw was an illusion. His father, the king, had created that for him. People dyed their hair so he wouldn't see anyone with gray hair. As people got old, they kind of moved out of his sight, and only young people were in his sight, and all these kind of things. And one day the young prince was managed to convince one of his friends to help him get outside the castle that they lived in. And when he did, he saw old people, and he saw sick people, and he saw dying people, and he saw dead people. And it shattered his world. He had to ask, what's this all about? And his friend told him, this is life. This, you know, what you've been living in there is not life. This is life. This is what happens. And his quest then was to understand the causes of suffering. And he would not be swayed or stopped until he found that answer. That was his quest. That was his hero's journey that he went on. So sometimes the call is to a call to awaken, a call to adventure in terms of experiencing more of life, more joy, more fullness, a deeper understanding of divine love and all of those things. Sometimes it's for a specific purpose of solving a problem. But there's the call to action that takes place. And next step Campbell throws in there, and I love this one, is the refusal of the call. The refusal of the call. You know, this is kind of like where we awaken and we know that we need to be on the path. We know that there's a path. There is something within us that is nudging us along. There's something within us that may be shouting in our ear. You know, the alarm clock may be blaring, bam, 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 bam. Time to wake up to your spiritual nature. And we say, no, I don't want to go to school today, Ma. I'm going to pull the pillow over my head and go back to sleep for a little while. Reminds me of the movie The Matrix, the first movie The Matrix, when we used to show it at the center. You know, this is kind of the same metaphor. The hero Nero. Everybody is in the Matrix, right? Which is Carl Jung's term for the collective unconsciousness. Everybody is in the Matrix. Everybody is asleep in the dream. And the robots that have taken over the world have learned how to program people to have dreams so that they just stay asleep. They just stay asleep in the dream. But something calls Nero to awaken, and then he awakens from his dream, and he goes on his hero's journey through the movie The Matrix. But there are other people who awaken and then decide, no, this is too hard. I'm going back to sleep. You know, the actor Joe Pants, that's not his full name, but he goes by the Pantalario or something like that. And he awakens and he decides he doesn't want to do that. And he's talking to the agent of the robots. And he says, I'll tell you what you want to know, but just what I want you to do is I want you to put me back to sleep. I want you to put me in a beautiful dream and make sure I never wake up. He wasn't ready to awaken. He wanted to go back into the dream. And this happens to us. And I think it can happen to us many times on the path. We start on the path and we're a little bit concerned or afraid or not quite ready, and we try to go back to our old ways. And then we start on the path, and then we go back to our old ways, see? And it's never quite cut and dried. Where we jump on the path and we begin our great adventure. So there's kind of this hesitancy to accept the call, you know. The hell the know, that which is familiar to us, is sometimes better than the heaven we don't know, and we tend to have to get ready. Now, there's a reason for that, and I just want to explain that in case anybody's going through it. I just want to kind of explain that. And I can tell just by looking at the clock that this is going to take 2 weeks, because I haven't even started. I haven't even started with the first obstacle yet. But this is an important setup, because if you don't recognize that you're on the journey, what difference does it make what obstacles you're going to meet when you get there, right? So here's the reason that sometimes we have false starts. In the numerology of Scripture, the Scripture that comes to us from the Middle East, the number 4 had special significance. So you remember it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and Moses had to go study with the priest in the desert for 40 years, and then the Hebrews, they had to wander the desert for 40 years after they left Egypt before they could get into the land of milk and honey, which is prosperity and harmony. And then Jesus in the New Testament, remember the New Testament authors were saying Jesus was kind of the new Moses, only better. So the things that took Moses 40 years, it only took Jesus 40 days to do. That was their way of showing the significance that this person was better than, more important than, more significant than. But Jesus had to go into the desert for 40 days. Those kind of things. So the zero is a number that means an undetermined amount of time. An undetermined amount of time. In other words, it takes as long as it takes. It takes as long as it takes. And the significance of the 4 was physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So when you see the number 40, when something took 40 days or 40 years or whatever, 40, it took as long as it took for that character, that individual, that persona in this story to be ready physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to go to the next step. So take Moses, for example, right? Moses killed the Egyptian officer and he fled to the desert. Moses had an anger management issue, right? Emotionally, his emotions got the best of him. And he had to work through that before he could fully step into his call, his hero's journey, which was to lead the Israelites out of bondage. And that's a metaphor. It's each and every one of us has to come out of the land of confusion. We have to take that journey. We have to make that bold step, and we have to come out. So, as Emmett Fox tells us, when we read the scripture, we have to look at it and say, I am each and every character I read about. That is a state of consciousness. And at times I represent that state of consciousness. So at times I'm stuck in the land of confusion, which is the significance of the term Egypt. We're stuck in this land of confusion and we have to get out. Something has to lead us out. That's the Moses part of us. But Moses was not emotionally mature enough to do the thing that he was being called to do. So he had to go out to the desert and he had to marry one of the 7 daughters, and 7 is a number that represents the fullness. He had to marry one of the 7 daughters of the priest, and the priest represents an approach to God. And he had to be there for 40 years. Right? He had to be there in that desert for as long as it took for him to get it together physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to do his task. So I think what happens to us sometimes, or in many cases, is we feel the urge, we feel the call, we want to get on the path, and we read a book, or we listen to a talk, or we find a teacher, and we enthusiastically jump in with both feet. Excuse me, my throat's getting a little dry. And then as we start on that path, we're not quite ready yet. We may have been there mentally. We may have said, "Oh yes, this is great. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I want to jump in here. It was not uncommon. People would come to our center 1 or 2 times, and they would say, "Well, sign me up for every class you have, and sell me all the books that I'm going to need." And they were just kind of very excited. And then we'd never see them again. They would go back home and it was like something else got in the way. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing people. I'm saying that's the false starts on our path. We take those, we get on and go, ooh, wait a second, I'm not quite ready for that. So we refuse the call. And we go back and we have to do whatever it takes to get over those obstacles that are in our way, so that we can then begin in earnest. Now another step, I don't know if it's the next one in sequence or it's further down the line, but it is certainly a step that happens sometimes multiple times in a journey, is that the protagonist is going to meet a mentor. There's going to be someone who says, now, when you get here, this is what's going to happen. And you have to remember not to be fooled what's going to happen by what you think is happening, but you're going to have to do this, that, or the other thing. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, the sailors were told that the Sirens would try to seduce them with their songs and get them to turn their ships into towards them, and they would go on the rocks, And Lori and I were in Italy maybe 20 years ago, and wherever we were along the coast, we were moving along the coast, and I saw these 3 outcroppings of rocks standing off the coast. And I realized in my mind that these were the 3 sisters that seduced the sailors, because it was easy to look at that and say, oh, that's the coastline, I'm going to turn in there. But it wasn't. You had to go much further before the water was safe enough to turn in. Right? So there was something in there. The mentors were telling them a story. They were giving them form. They were giving them shape. They were giving them things they could remember. But they were warning them what was ahead. Don't be seduced by the songs of the sirens, but keep sailing on, right? Because the better water is ahead. So there's always kind of this mentor that explains what's going to happen. Joseph Campbell was a guest at George Lucas's ranch out in California. George Lucas, the filmmaker, and they had these discussions. And Lucas took this to heart, and this became the plot of the first Star Wars movie. This was the young Luke Skywalker. It opens up, and he's there with in his home, and then all of a sudden, the people who raised him are gone because the Star Troopers came, and now he's on his quest. And along the way, eventually, he meets Yoda. And Yoda is the wizard or the mentor. Right? And he explains to him what he's going to need to do, what has to be done. So there's this mentor that comes along the way and fills people in. On our spiritual journey, I think the first thing we have to recognize is that we are on a journey. We have to come to grips with that. Either we accept it or we don't. And if we don't, then we don't waste our time. We go do other things. But we are on this journey, and this journey that they are describing in mythology and in metaphors and in all of these things, this is our journey. This is your journey. This is my journey. Each one of us is on this journey. And we have to understand that there are others who have gone before us. They have taken different paths to get to the top of the mountain, but there are others who have gone before us. And they serve as our mentors. They tell us what to expect along the way. Okay? I love the symbolism from Buddhism and the symbolism from Judaism that says the same thing, tells us the same thing in image forms. When Adam and Eve left the garden, there were 2 cherubim stationed there. And the tree of life is back in that garden. Right? So they left the garden because they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. Not of good and evil, but of the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. That's what they left. But there's another tree there. There's another tree there waiting, and it's the tree of life. But to get back to that tree of life, somehow they've got to get past those 2 cherubim. In Buddhism, we have the image of the Buddha sitting in a cave meditating. And at the entrance to the cave, because you can see the Buddha, sitting right at the mouth of the cave meditating. And at the entrance, we have the two mean-looking guys, scary-looking guys, frightening-looking guys. And the Buddha is sitting in the cave meditating in a blissful pose, holding up the palm of his hand like a crossing guard would for stop. 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 And the symbolism is very much the same. in order to step into that peacefulness, into that bliss, in order to get back into that place from which we came, to get back into the garden, as Judy Collins would tell us, we have to get by the two guards at the gate. And what the raised hand of the Buddha is telling us is, pay no attention. Pay no attention. They are creations of your own mind. They are delusions of your own mind. Come in, come in. Now to finish, I guess we'll finish the setup this week, and then we'll start on the obstacles next week. What we want to remember is that every religion, if not most every religion, every spiritual movement, every teaching, it starts when somebody has a mystical experience. I'm going to call it a mystical experience for lack of a better term. Somebody has an experience of another reality. In Plato's Republic, he gives us the people in the cave, and that's, of course, it's in public domain. You can search for that, and you'll find it. Plato's analogy of the cave, and you'll find it. And these people are positioned in the cave in such a way they can only see the reflections on the wall of what's going on outside the mouth of the cave, and they believe that's the reality. And then one of them gets free and goes out and sees that there's a whole other world out there, comes back and tries to tell him, and they think he's crazy. He's crazy, you see. Buddha sat under the tree, and he made a commitment. I think that's important to remember. He made a commitment. He said, I will sit here until I get it or I die. Now, he knew about enlightenment. He was seeking enlightenment. He was seeking the answers. He was seeking to find the cause of pain and suffering so he could go back to his people and alleviate pain and suffering. That was his journey. And he finally said, I am going to sit here under this tree until I get it or I die. Right? Jesus had the experience that he and the Father are one. He also said, you and I are one. Everything I've done you can do. But he had the experience of the very presence of the divine within him. The Virgin Mary had the experience of the presence of the angel Gabriel. Moses had the experience of the bush that burned and did not consume, another metaphor for a mystical experience. Elisha was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, another blissful meditation experience. Paul was knocked off his horse and blinded by the light, and in that experience said that he met the risen Christ. Remember, Paul was not a contemporary of Jesus. He came after. And this was an argument that he was having with the followers of Jesus. And they said, well, you don't even know Jesus. You never even met him. And Paul's claim would be, but my experience of the risen Christ was real. He had some type of an experience, right? Muhammad had an experience of the angel in the cave. Joseph Smith had an experience of an angel and golden tablets, and that founded the Mormon religion. So what we find is that religions begin when somebody has that experience. And then teachings and practices and disciplines and all of these different things, dogma and creed, form up around the religion. And while you would think that the purpose of those should be to help the adherents also have that experience, right? What tends to happen, as in any human organization, is that the organizations become about themselves. They become about preserving themselves. They become about preserving the purity of their teachings, the authority, right? The licensing, the ordination, and all of these things that says, well, not anybody can go out and teach our teaching. We have to certify them to make sure that they're teaching the pure teaching. And in human organizations, I think over time they lose sight of their mission. And eventually, with every organization, it comes down to survival. How are they going to survive? How are they going to get enough money to stay afloat, is what it comes down to. And when that happens, all sense of whatever the purpose or the mission, as noble as it may have been when they started out, is gone. Now it's about survival. Now if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, now we're back down to the base level. We have to survive. What we are discussing here, I'm trying to make this as plain and as, I realize I'm repeating some things that we've talked about for the last several weeks and perhaps months, but I want to make this as clear as possible. I want to take any mystique, any magic, anything that, I want to make it as simple as possible. We come from the joy, we come from the bliss, we come from the divine. There's no place else we could have come from. And there's that spark within us that knows it and is calling us back home. And our journey is to have that realization. Have that realization. So the same experience, the same type of experience that served as the spark to ignite the different movements around the world, that is available to you and I. That is, in fact, our destiny. I believe we have those specifically, spontaneously as children. But nevertheless, there's something within us that knows. There's something within us that knows that we have to get on that journey. And then what we must do is we go through these steps that Campbell was talking about. We find teachers and we find mentors, the mentors who are going to tell us, who have already told us, here's what's going to happen when you get here. And then when you get there, here's what's going to happen when you get there. And then when you get there, here's what's going to happen when you get there. But we have to accept responsibility for our journey. No one else can do it for us. Literally, no one is going to be able to come and tap us on the shoulder with a magic wand and do it for us. We have to be aware of our responsibility. We have to accept the call. As many times as we step forward and step back and step forward and step back, we have to one day step forward and say, this is it. Like the Buddha, this is it. I will be on this path even if it kills me. This is it. And we have to recognize that we are the only ones that can do it. Now, where are we going to do it? The only place we can do it is in our consciousness. It is not a physical journey. It is not even a mental journey. It starts as a mental journey. But as I said, we get to the point where the words will fail us. We get to the point where ideas no longer work. But consciousness still is. Consciousness still exists. We are spiritual adventurers in the unexplored territory of mind. So for today, we've covered the fact that we are awakening to the call to our own hero's journey. We understand that sometimes there's a hesitancy to respond to that call, and that is a normal and natural part of our growth. And now hopefully we're ready to move to understand what the mentors have to tell us, what the obstacles might be. And it's good to know that, because otherwise we get to the obstacle and we say, oh, nope, I'm on the wrong path. I'm gonna put the pillow over my head and go back to sleep again for a little while. But if we know what to expect when we get there, if we know what we're looking at, and if we know what kind of tricks are being played on us by our own mind, the two ugly characters keeping us out of the garden, keeping us out of the cave, are delusions of our own mind. If we know that, if we can understand that, then it helps us to get by. So next week we're going to pick up in earnest. This is the third week that we're going to do it. But next week we're going to pick up in earnest with the obstacles along the path. And what I invite you to do this week, to have fun with this, right? Have fun. Right? You're on a sacred journey. Have fun. Do a little research. If you're not familiar with Campbell, go online and look up his works. Look up some of the works of mythology. Look at the mythologies of different cultures and look at their creation mythology and see where they might be similar and see how they might be different. Think about kind of religious characters. Look at different religions and ask yourself, how did that religion start? Who was behind that movement? How did that get to be a thing, you know? What's it all about? And see for yourself if some of these things, if not all of these things that I'm telling you are true. Ultimately, you're the one that has to decide. Just because I tell you doesn't mean it's true. Just because you read it in a book doesn't mean it's true. Excuse me. But you must decide. So let's end it right there. Next week we will pick up with the five different areas where we encounter obstacles along the way. And so it is.